Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has returned from his trip to Asia, where he met with leaders, including Chinese President Xi Jinping, in an attempt to expand Canada's trading relationships beyond the United States. The International Trade Minister, Maninder Sidhu, was on that trip, and he joins me live from Brampton this morning. Nice to see you, Minister.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Rosemary. I just want to start by giving the Blue Jays a huge shout out. It's an incredible season, incredible team. I was 9 years old when Joe Carter hit that last one in 1992-93, and my daughter's 9, so we got to watch it together. And phenomenal, huge shout out to the Blue Jays for bringing Canadians together.
I will allow a shout out, given it's our only baseball team, and it was a good run. Thank you for that. Let's get down to business. So Canada and China, I guess, are talking again. The Prime Minister has described this as a turning point. But Canada has imposed, or still has, 100% tariffs on Chinese EV vehicles. As you know, China retaliated, putting tariffs on canola and agricultural goods. Where does that stand now, Minister? What is the likelihood that that can get resolved, given the Chinese side has said Canada must remove the EV tariffs first?
Yeah, look, with China, it's very important. They're our second largest trading partner. In South Korea, I sat down with my counterpart as well, Minister Wang. The Prime Minister sat down with his counterpart as well to work through some of these trade irritants around pet food, beef, canola, meeting with stakeholders. That's exactly what they want us to do. And you're right, the relationship was dormant for about over 7 years. There was no conversations going on. The Jet Sea Commission to work through some of these trade irritants was not, very active. And so we need to make sure we restart that. That's now been restarted. Having those conversations, having that dialogue will allow us to work through some of the challenges, but also we sat down and we explored other opportunities. If you look at our energy sector and what China's doing in terms of energy storage, there's a lot of opportunities there in terms of technology and capabilities. And so, we're going to work through those challenges, but we're also going to explore opportunities.
But is it your understanding that as you work through the challenges, as you call them, that if one side ditches the tariffs, the other side will? I mean, that would have to happen, I imagine, if for Canada to go ahead with that.
So these are very live conversations. You did mention EVs, and that's the Minister of Finance is reviewing that right now. But what I can tell you is, actively sitting down with the Chinese is helping work through the dialogue on these. And it's not the first time we've had ministers visit China now. And so stepping up our engagement is very, very important. If you're having those conversations, you're able to work through the challenges.
Well, I was just talking to the leader of the official opposition. We talked on Friday, and one of the things that he criticized the government for and the Prime Minister for is going overseas, having these trips, and coming back with no real results. What would you say in response to that?
Well, look, if I look at what we did in the ASEAN region in Malaysia, that's an important region. Just last year, trade grew by roughly 10%, one of the fastest growing regions in the world in terms of trade with Canada. You look at what Malaysia Petronas is doing with LNG Canada. I was in Kitimat, BC, talking to the workers from New Brunswick, from Ontario, from Alberta that helped build that. 20,000 workers. They're looking to double their investments. And so the Prime Minister and I were there to talk to some of these companies, because if they're going to double investment, that means work for 20,000 more workers. And so these are tangible conversations leading to tangible work opportunities for Canadians. And I think that's exactly what Canadians expect us to do. We also relaunched negotiations with the Philippines, a free trade agreement with the Philippines. Of course, relaunched negotiations with Thailand. Both those countries represent roughly 180 million people, Rosemary. And so we're there. We're opening up opportunities, as the Prime Minister promised Canadians, to diversify our trading partnerships.
I know you're not in the negotiations with the United States, but you're sort of, adjacent to it, because your job is to find all these other partners. I wonder how... What you think is the likelihood of the United States coming back to the table, given Donald Trump has said, even after the Prime Minister apologized for this ad by the Ontario Premier, that he doesn't want to talk?
Yeah, so on the U.S., as you said, Minister LeBlanc is leading those conversations, but it's very important to mention that the U.S. will always be an important trading partner to Canada. The geography is not going to change. And so as those conversations continue, my job is to focus on diversifying our trading partnerships with new markets, but also some of the mature markets that we already deal with. And so there are a lot of opportunities. Other countries, Rosemary, I can tell you, are getting more ambitious. They're more aggressive on the ground. They're present. And any person with credible business experience will tell you that deals are not signed on the first handshake. It takes time, and we need to be able to be there with presence, with sustained presence, to be there in the region to make sure that we're able to showcase Canadian innovation, Canadian technology. Another example I'll give you, Rosemary, is CAE, a flight training Canadian company. 4,000 workers in Quebec. They're supporting hundreds of small and mid-sized businesses. They're looking to rapidly expand into that region. We're going to be there to support them as well.
But let me ask you this. Are those businesses and those places more attracted to Canada because we're not throwing tariffs all around willy-nilly? Like, is that argument resonating in a different way?
Canada is seen as a reliable and stable trading partner. So the calls that I'm getting is Canada is a beacon of hope, international rules-based order, trading order. And I think we need to continue focusing on that. That's where Canada shines. We've got 15 trade agreements already with 51 countries, access to 1.5 billion consumers. I just wrapped up negotiations with Ecuador. We signed a free trade agreement with Indonesia a few weeks ago, a country that's going to be the 5th largest economy in the world with 275 million people. We're looking at the Middle East in terms of investment and promotion agreements. I think we need to do more of that. And so as countries call us, we need to be there to answer that call and be there in the region to promote Canadian companies.
I want to ask you a budget question if I can, because it's on Tuesday. The Prime Minister has said to expect generational investments. It is also going to include cuts. How worried should Canadians be that those cuts will affect some of the services that they get from the government?
So, Rosemary, a little over 6 months ago, Canadians asked us to, make generational investments to create opportunities for them. That's exactly what this budget will do, to create those opportunities for Canadian workers, for Canadian businesses. We're in a time of crisis. This is not a joke anymore. We need to be able to focus on Canadians, and that's exactly what this government will be doing on Tuesday. I know many Canadians are excited to see what's in the budget, and I won't scoop our Minister of Finance, but I think Canadians will be happy with what's in the budget.
Will they be happy with what's in the budget if they also know that there's a huge price tag attached, $70 to $100 billion in deficit? That could be a hard sell for some people, Minister.
So there's ambitious investments, but there's also rigorous discipline in this budget. And every dollar that we spend will go further to help build Canada as the strongest economy in the G7. You talk about housing, you talk about infrastructure, talk about catalyzing enormous private investments. We've got a target of expanding trade by $300 billion in non-U.S. exports within the next 10 years. You can't do that without adding capacity at the ports. And we need to be able to attract investments, as the Prime Minister and I were doing in Asia. We need to be able to grow trade with trading partners, and that's what we'll focus on.
Okay, Minister of International Trade, Maninder Sidhu, thank you for making the time. I appreciate you keeping the hope alive with your jersey still on the next morning.
We've got to stay at it. We got next year, but thanks again, Rosemary.
Okay, thanks, Minister. Nice to see you.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he has no plans to restart trade talks with Canada after Ontario Premier Doug Ford's anti-tariff ad using the words of former Republican President Ronald Reagan. Prime Minister Mark Carney was asked about the stalled negotiations and Trump's claims that Carney apologized for the ad.
I'm the one who is responsible in my role as Prime Minister for the relationship with the President of the United States, and the federal government is responsible for the foreign relationship with the U.S. government. So things happen, we take the good with the bad, and I apologize to them. The Americans will only agree, as is the case in any trade negotiation, something that also is in the U.S. interest. There are a number of things where those interests align, and we'll wait until they're ready.
Carney wrapped up a 9-day trip through Asia to bolster trade, where he announced he's working on free trade deals with Thailand and the Philippines. He also met with Chinese President Xi Jinping, the first bilateral meeting between Canada and China since 2017. So how much of a turning point is this for Canadian diversification, other international relations? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Emilie Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir in Montreal. Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter in the Globe and Mail's Parliament Hill Bureau, joining us in Ottawa, and Ryan Tumilty, a Toronto Star political reporter in Ottawa too. Good to see everyone this morning. Appreciate you being here. There was, as is the case with this Prime Minister, a fair amount of news out of that press conference yesterday, notably that he had in fact apologized directly to the President, and he says that he also told Doug Ford not to run that ad. Ryan, maybe I'll start with you on those 2 points and whether you think those are significant developments in the Canada-U.S. trade talks.
I mean, I think it's been clear for a while that, Doug Ford wants to take a much more aggressive stance with the president than the Prime Minister does. The Prime Minister seems to be much more eager to talk and hope to come to a resolution. Premier Ford seems more likely to want to, put his fist up, I guess, a little bit in his dealings with the Americans. I think the fact that Carney apologized for the ad that he didn't actually have a role in is interesting. And I'm not sure how well that will play with Canadians. I think Canadians are much more, even if the consequences are terrible, are much more in a mood for Premier Ford's approach to this than maybe a more conciliatory approach to President Trump.
What do you make of it, Steph? Because I've noticed that the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, this morning was asked about the 10% that Donald Trump was going to slap on Canada and said he had no idea if it was coming or not. So it's as always, hard to navigate with the president, and it's not clear to me how these talks get restarted.
In a general sense, yeah. I mean, obviously, it's been proven impossible to navigate with the president and figure out, which turn in this corn maze of international relations is he going to take next for us. But I do think it's been proven over time, rightfully or wrongfully, that he is very sensitive about getting criticized. He is, members of his administration are. Certainly the U.S. ambassador to Canada really doesn't like it when Canadians play tough. And so in as much as Canadians are in the mood for a more aggressive posture, a sense that the government is standing up for them, fighting for them, I do think there is some acknowledgement that you can go too far here. And I'm going to borrow a line entirely from a colleague of all of ours, Matt Gurney, who put it this way. Carney and Ford, the prime minister and the premiers have this good cop, bad cop thing going. And the president has basically shot both cops and burned down the police station. Like he doesn't want to deal with it. Dealt with in this way. So we might have to negotiate amongst ourselves, maybe a better approach. I don't know what that looks like. I don't have a crystal ball, but whatever we're doing right now doesn't exactly seem to be working.
What do you think, Emilie? Apologizing, I guess, might help smooth over relations. That the president was more conciliatory on the plane back than he was starting out. So maybe that helped. I don't know if it even matters if it helped.
Yeah, I don't think we've learned anything by learning that Donald Trump's ego is very sensitive. I think we knew that already. And I think there is this learning curve for Doug Ford himself. And a part of Canadians really is that when you face a bully that has a lot more power over you than the other way around, there's things that feel great saying, but that are actually dangerous if they're in a bad mood. Yeah. And we're a G7 country, we're not used to this kind of bullying relationship. A lot of smaller countries are. So I think that was very ill-advised to think that we had time for this. And it was also ill-advised to think that there should be different people speaking on for foreign policies in Canada at the same time with different messages. Right. I think it was to be expected that this would backfire. And I think that people who feel like, sticking it to Donald Trump and just saying it like it is feels good. I think having an economy that functions feels better, and that we need to be careful what we say. And that there might be a lesson learned here, although this is sad because it is taking into consideration the real state of the power discrepancies between Canada and the U.S. It wasn't in our face in as much of a painful way when it was a different administration, but it was always that power discrepancies, and now we're just feeling the burn of it more.
Okay, so let's talk about the other part of the approach by the Prime Minister, and that's to diversify trade. And he spent 9 days in Asia talking to lots of different people, trying to shore up new trade agreements or opportunities, investments. Ryan, how important is it that those moves start to turn into something real if we are not moving forward for now anyway with Donald Trump?
I think it's significant, but I think it's long-term significant. A trade deal with China or Indonesia or any of those countries is going to take a long time to pay dividends, and certainly to do anything to replace our trade deal with the U.S., such as it is. I think, I'm sure the Prime Minister would like to see deals happening next week. I don't think that's too likely, though. I think it's going to take time. But the immediate can crowd out the long-term needs in politics, and this is a long-term need for Canada. Even after President Trump, I think we can expect an America that is less a reliable trading partner than it has been for the past, 6 decades. So I think there's a real need here for long-term diversification, and I think that's what will come of that. But I don't think it'll solve any short-term political problems.
And does that is that enough of a justification for getting relations back on track with China, Steph? In terms of the Prime Minister saying yes, he'd go to China and actually have a visit, and they're going to have some talks now about how to iron out our trade issues.
The relationship had to reset at some point, and I don't know if this is the right point. I mean, arguably, yes, if it helps us diversify our markets, then that would be a great thing for Canada. We've had everybody sort of knows now this relationship we have with China fits and starts for decades, and we've never really managed to cement it and keep it going even in the most challenging times. And so the question is, obviously, our relationship with China will never be at the magnitude, say, economically, than it is with America. But the question is, if we are going to build this new relationship, I would like to know, how is the government preparing for it in a way that when it gets thrown off the rails the next time, because that seems to happen every time we try and build new relationships with China, that we're not back to ground zero again, or the starting point every single time. And I also think that, the secondary piece of this trade diversification push that the Prime Minister has going is, and perhaps we'll hear more about this in Tuesday's budget, is you need the infrastructure at home for everybody to be able to make, manufacture, transport, and export those goods to those new markets. And most folks will tell you we're not ready for that part either.
Yeah. Last minute to you, Emilie.
I think it's both China and India. We're talking about China today because the Prime Minister just came back from there, but it was just 2 weeks ago that the India commercial trade relationship was also expanded. And so I think we need to think about the fact that we are dealing with 3 powers, India, China, and the United States, who are largely just bigger than us. And also all 3 of them have massive human rights abuse that impact diasporas in Canada. Obviously, this was the case of the difficult relationship with India, and it's also the thing with China as well. And so I think for Canada's position to be strong, it's not to think that we're not going to be dealing with regimes that are problematic. It's about not putting our eggs into the same basket and being dependent and therefore more bullyable by that said basket. And so if we're dealing with all 3 of them at the same time, we're less exposed to all 3 of them at the same time. And this is why I think this might actually not be too much of a bad thing, although it needs to be dealt with a lot of caution.
Okay, Emilie, Steph, Ryan, go have another coffee. We'll talk next hour about the budget. Thank you all for being here so far.